Hiya folks, welcome to Ficus Bonsai. This is Mark de Cruz. Today I'm going to talk to you about summer work on ficuses. I have here a Ficus retusa, which is what we're going to prune mainly today. This is a ficus, a lipstick ficus, or a Ficus philkan as it's called in India. This is a Ficus Panda. It has small little round, rather glossy leaves, and behind me is another Ficus microcarpa nitida, an Indian laurel as it's called. So I'm going to show you how I deal with the pruning at this time of the year, in summertime, and the tasks that I do while I'm working on my trees over summer. Now many of the tasks I repeat all through the year. The summer one is particularly important because things are going full blast ahead. When it comes to working on the ficuses or on any of my trees, the first thing I work on is on cleaning out the weeds. Pull out the weeds with a pair of tweezers, and I hold the weed so that I can actually get to the root, and then I pull out the entire weed. That way I hope that it doesn't come back too much. But these particular things are called pearlworth, and they seem to be rather prevalent in our part of the world. But I'm sure you'll have your own weeds in your part of the world. Now, why is it important to clean out the weeds? Well, the weeds are constantly fighting for the nutrients from the pot. So it's best always to keep the weeds out. Apart from the fact it does look much neater and tidier and cleaner. So that really is the first task, is weeding the pot. Right, so once you've finished off with the weeding, the next task is to actually work on the nebari. And the idea is to make sure that you remove the moss from close to the root, because the bark needs to form, and as long as you've got moss on the lower part of the trunk, it doesn't form a proper bark area. So that's what we have to do. So you just remove some of the moss that is there. Use the toothbrush if you have to clean out that. While you're removing these things and you find these little roots that have developed that are not required, they're rather long runaway roots. They just make the tree look much younger. Ficuses are prone to having these roots, so it's best to just remove them out. Once you've cleared out the moss from the base of the nebari, you move on to making sure that you firm your moss back into the pot. I like to push it below the rim so that when it dries, it doesn't lift up the moss. At the moment, the moss is well settled into the soil, so it's not very unlikely to lift up even in the driest of days. But on moss that is just going inside, sometimes that's an issue, and it's best to work at pushing it into the tray. So this is a brass spatula. It's got the right kind of angles on it. So during the summer, and every time I work on a tree, in fact, this is the basic kind of work that I would do on it. But in the summer, when the weather is nice and hot and you want your bark to form nicely, it's a good time to make sure that there's no moss on the bark, because that way it will form out nicely. Now this tree, the philkan or the lipstick ficus, doesn't really need much pruning at the moment, so I'm not going to be pruning this one very much. But in terms of working on this, that's more or less been done. Now what I need to do is put the feed onto this. So I'm going to use some pellets of feed. This happens to be BioGold, but you can use any kind of pelletized feed. So make sure that you space them at about 2 centimeters, 2.5 centimeters apart, or an inch for you Americans. Run all the way around there. And then when you're finally getting done with finishing off the soil and putting in the sphagnum moss, you can clean it up with an emery rubber to remove any of the scale.
Yeah. Little bit.
On the fly creation. Still. Right, this Ficus retusa does need some pruning, and it needs the usual summer work that we've just been doing on it. So the moss has been stolen away by some birdies out here, so I'm going to have to rebuild that, and I'll show you how we do that. But for now, let's do some pruning on this. As with all the ficuses which are continuously growing species, you need to cut them back to just leave 3 of this year's nodes on them. Make sure that the nodes that you leave have buds on them. With the buds then already appearing is a good time to start pruning them. And when you cut, make sure that you cut perpendicular to this. So this one is growing upwards. I don't quite like it up in that position, and I could wire it out there, but it's too long and too big. So I'm going to cut it off all together from the base. So this shoots which are hiding at the moment will get the chance to come outwards. So these shoots that are hiding will now come outwards, just because I cut off that branch from there. Branches going vertical and into the crown, they don't need to, they can be removed. So the idea is to try and get light into the crown, while at the same time making sure that you keep a structure developing in the crown. And so that's all there is to pruning a Ficus retusa, or most ficuses for that matter have the same way of being pruned. Try not to fall into the trap of pruning to shape, but rather the prune for structure within your branches. And one of the best ways of actually seeing that you have a good structure in your bonsai is to, well, look underneath it, or if it's a small one, look lift it up and look into the crown of it, and that way you can see all the branches, and you know if they're in the right position, and if they're not, then you can just deal with it accordingly. So now I'm going to be doing this patching task, and I use sphagnum moss. Sphagnum moss has been dried, so this is dried sphagnum moss that I've soaked properly. It's been grated and dried, and then I just take some of it and put it so that it forms a base at the of the moss, and use my fingers to compress it into into the space. And then I use the spatula to make sure that I've flattened it nicely, and I take some of the earlier moss that I had and I sprinkle it onto I normally would grate it, but if you're not grating it, if the grater is not handy, it's easy enough just to collect some of the early bits of moss that you had and form it into so within a few weeks you should have this area patched up again. Right, so now you just carry on with making sure that you level off the moss and it's being tucked into the side. And as with the other ones, I'm going to work on removing the moss from close to the trunk. And then clean out all the this way. You make sure that the bark forms properly and that this inverse taper that often happens at the base of the trunk doesn't become an issue. And now for my last little Ficus Panda, I'm going to do some summer work on this as before. Now this particular one doesn't need any pruning as of yet. It was only recently defoliated, so it doesn't need to have any pruning as such. There's some tidying up of a few stubs that didn't quite take on that have to happen. But other than that, I think it doesn't really need anything in the pruning department. It does, however, need its moss removed from and the moss is starting to climb up. So, just work away at it all the way around. Once you remove them, use the toothbrush to clear up any stragglers left on it. So. And then use the spatula to firm your moss down again. And then finally, let's put some feed into the pot. There we go. Well, we have completed with the summer task on these three little ficus that I have. To recap, the first task that I did was to remove the weeds from the tray from the pots, and while removing the weeds, I removed any of the small roots that were detracting from the nibari of the tree. And then the next step I did was to remove the sphagnum moss, or the moss that was growing onto the trunks of the tree, and made sure that I used the toothbrush to kind of finish off with the cleaning of removing the last of the spores from the trunk, and after which I tackled the green moss, and if the moss needed repairing, I repaired the moss, added some brown sphagnum moss grated, and then also finished off with the green moss if it was required. And then the last bit was, of course, not to forget feeding the bonsais. I'm using, in this case, an organic pelletized fertilizer, which basically will last till the end of the season. It takes about a couple of months to dissolve away, and this would be, I think, the last time I'd use a solid fertilizer on it. The fertilizer dissolves into the sphagnum moss. It creates a nice environment for the microbes and the fungus living in the soil, and it makes the tree much healthier when you use this approach. This particular Ficus retusa did need a bit of pruning, and after the pruning, despite the fact that we removed such a lot of green from it, it still looks as though it's not been pruned too heavily at all. So it's a nice pruning. You can see right through it, and it looks very healthy and nice. And of course, the final touch is to clean down the pots. Use the emery rubber to get rid of scale and whatever else. And if you carry on with this kind of practice, in general, you will find that your trees do look nice and healthy and will grow on well. And we used the spatula, we used a tweezer, some toothbrush, emery rubber, and my metal chopstick, and a set of scissors and branch cutters. And that's really all there is to in looking after your ficuses over summer. If you haven't already subscribed, do subscribe, because I do add videos regularly. And if you just subscribe, make sure that you click on the bell, because then it will inform you of any of the videos that I have add as we go along. And If you enjoyed the video, give us a thumbs up and do share the videos around. And looking forward to seeing you again. Thank you. This is Mark de Cruz of Market Bonsai signing off. Bye for now.